Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this second afternoon of our webinar on biophilic art and climate change, presencing the heating skies. As those of you who were with us yesterday will know, I'm Andrew Watts. I'm an academic based at the University of Birmingham in the School of Languages, Cultures, Art, History and Music. And I've co-organised this event in collaboration with Jamie Jackson and Sally Payan at the visual arts organisation Salt Road, and we've been delighted, of course, to be working with them. Those of you who were with us yesterday will know that we had a really fantastic start to the event. We heard from the climate scientists themselves, thinking through their hopes and expectations of what the arts might be able to do in terms of fostering understanding of climate change, and, to borrow a phrase from one of them, transforming awareness into action. We heard about the arts across a whole host of different media as well, film, photography in particular, and we'll be continuing very much in that vein today by thinking about community engagement and the role of government and policymakers as well in, again, transforming that awareness into action around climate change. So without further ado, and I'm going to try and spare my voice a little bit this afternoon, I'm going to hand over to the first panel, which is called Actively Stopping Harm. It's going to be chaired by Nick Grayson from Birmingham City Council. So Nick, it's over to you.
Right. Thank you, Andrew. We've got some really interesting speakers lined up for you now in this session, and we're covering a lot of different aspects and angles around policy, direct action, city networks across the globe, and a worked case study example for Birmingham. So without further ado, here's Julie to open us up from her perspective. Julie, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So just a little bit about me. I'm a poet and a theatre maker who got very angry and became a politician. And I got angry about a lot of things, and I'm still angry. I put myself forward for the 2014 European elections against Nick Griffin, the BNP fascist Nazi Holocaust denier. Kicked him out of the parliament and was re-elected again in 2019. And I'd never been in politics before, but I felt very much that if we are going to have a society that is actively going to stop harm, we have to have people in positions of power who will speak the truth and who will also stand up and be a voice for people who don't have a voice. And that's kind of what I decided to do as a parliamentarian. So I'm going to just say a little bit about the different parliamentary roles that I had, and then talk about three main things. So I was on several parliamentary committees. My main committee was the Committee for Culture and Education, which also includes citizenship and youth policy, and media to some degree. And I always interpreted citizenship as being not just something that kids did for half an hour on a Friday morning in school, but active citizenship, meaning, getting involved in the issues of the day that affect you, if necessary, being out on the streets, campaigning, protesting, not just that idea of British values, which I think is so often what is happening in citizenship education. So culture and education was my main committee, and largely it wasn't a legislative committee. The only work that we did in there on legislation was really around audiovisual media services directives and copyright. So largely it was policy recommendations and best practice sharing. I was also on the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee, and what we did, again, not a legislative committee, but very, very concerned about intersectionality, about mainstreaming gender, LGBTIQA rights as human rights, and was actually a committee that was very active in terms of the effect of climate change on women. I was also in the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee, and so certainly new models of economics was really something that was pushing in there in terms of cooperative social enterprises, the wonderful initiative of the Post-Crash Economic Society that was set up at Manchester University, just trying to get those things into the sort of, into the conversation, into the mindset, if where possible, to even get them written into reports. I was also on the Regional Development Committee, and that was the committee that took care of money that came back to the most deprived regions. And actually, we did a lot of work in the Regional Development Committee on initiatives around green energy transition, jobs in green industries. I co-authored a report on women in green jobs. The Parliament also has intergroups. These are like APPGs, so these are cross-party, where MEPs might want to pursue in a very direct way a particular issue and come together around that. So I was in many intergroups, but in the Parliament from 2019 to 2020, so my last 7 months in the Parliament, we had a Green New Deal intergroup, which I think was really important, because many people talk about the Green New Deal and they're not all talking about the same Green New Deal. So the Green New Deal that was proposed, for example, by DiEM25, Yanis Varoufakis and his activists, is a very different Green New Deal from the Green New Deal that was being discussed here in the UK, very different even from the Labour Party's Green New Deal, and I'm a Labour politician. So having a group of people, a group of politicians to talk about the Green New Deal and what they might mean by that, but particularly progressive left politicians, was very useful, and we could take those issues then back into our committees. We also had responsibility on delegations for relations with other countries, and I had responsibility for relations with Bosnia, Herzegovina and Kosovo, where in fact I did work on green issues and stopping doing no harm. The primary thing that I did was take up a case with the UN about lead poisoning for Romani camps. And it is really possible to, as an MEP, to be very effective on some quite important issues like that really affect people's lives. And I was also in the Joint Parliamentary Assembly for the EU and Africa, Caribbean and Pacific countries. And I have to say that perhaps some of the best work that we did as MEPs was done there, because of course we were meeting with parliamentarians from low-lying island states who absolutely know what climate change means. It means that their communities will be underwater. You know, this is an existential threat for them. And I think those of us who were on that joint parliamentary assembly really understood a lot more about actively stopping harm. So that was the kind of wide gamut of all the things that we could be involved in. And we had various mechanisms that we could use to try and alert people to harms or to push to stop harms. And they included getting your hands on committee reports, so being appointed as a rapporteur or as a shadow rapporteur, obviously making speeches in the Parliament, especially when heads of state came to the plenary. Also written questions and oral questions asked of the commissioners, which they have to answer, by the way, and everything that we did in the Parliament was transparent. So all our committee meetings were live streamed, all the parliamentary plenaries are live streamed, you know, all our written questions and the answers are all online, and it's still all online for everybody to see. So I want to talk about the things that I think are really important. So in terms of what you can do using a political platform. So transparency for me was really important. Transparency in every aspect of my work, but also pushing for transparency in the various areas I'd be working on. So I'm just going to give an example. My political group was really responsible for good legislation around conflict minerals. So these are blood minerals, essentially from the Congo, where children are involved in slave labor, working with highly toxic metals that go into our iPhones and computers. And my political group fought for transparency of the supply chain, and it was transparency of the supply chain that it is that will force the producers to change their practices. Also, another good example is the labeling on goods. So the EU labels goods from Palestine and Israel, so you can tell whether or not the goods you are buying are coming from an illegal settlement. Again, this is transparency, and it demonstrates to the consumers, to the ordinary citizens, that you know where this stuff is coming from, you know who might be harmed. Okay, you have to make a choice then. Also, transparency in voting. So all our roll call votes were captured, and there were a variety of different civil society and NGO websites that would process all the roll call votes and be able to demonstrate how we voted on certain things. And certainly, you know, we were very, very accessible, so people could email us. I'm very active on social media, so they could attack me on social media, you know, or find out how I'd voted in a certain way, and lobby me in that way. And that comes to lobbying, and lobbying needs to be really transparent too. So who are you meeting? Whose events are you speaking at? And the Parliament.
Julie, just a couple more minutes, Julie.
Yeah, okay. So that's another way that we could be transparent. By putting that up on, you know, we had registers where we would note all our meetings. I want to talk a little bit now about the arts then, and why the arts are so important. So in terms of policy and if you like, budgets, because budget makes a difference. Certainly we had the European Year of Cultural Heritage, and the Green Agenda was really starting to come through at that point. It was around the time of the Paris COP. And certainly in terms of cultural heritage, there was an understanding about the effects of climate change, for example, on old buildings or stones, or, you know, other forms of cultural heritage. So, for example, the village of Hasan Keyf, which is on the Euphrates in the southern part of Turkey, was put on a watch list by Europa Nostra, which is the European network for cultural heritage. And I went to Hasan Keyf to support the local campaigners there, and we managed to stop the dam. We managed to delay the actual destruction of the village several times, although sadly now it has been destroyed. But again, and also I wrote a letter to the Dutch contractors, and various people actually pulled out once they realized the damage that this would cause to the whole of the river valley, going into Iraq, not just in Turkey. One
minute, Julie.
Yeah, okay. The Green New Deal that has been tweaked enormously because of what's happened regarding COVID now includes, so this is at European level, and we're not part of it because of Brexit, but it now includes a new initiative which is linking culture to climate, and it's called the Bauhaus Green New Deal project. So, and at some point in the future, it's going to be working beyond EU member state borders. So everybody involved in the movement that we're involved in this country should be aware of that and the opportunities for us to participate. And then I just want to say something about amazing campaigners and what artists can do to change things. A group of artists in Newcastle boycotted and campaigned against the sponsorship of the Great Exhibition of the North a few years ago, which was being sponsored by BAE Systems, and effectively managed to get BAE removed from sponsorship of that. And I just want to pay tribute to incredible artists and campaigners like them, Art Not Oil, Platform, also the organisation DSMOG, who really they enable people like me to then translate those actions into concrete proposals within a parliamentary and political environment. And I know I'm supposed to finish,
Julie,
but I just
Julie,
want to say something very quickly about stakeholders, and this is important. So working with stakeholders is really, really, really crucial. So children, students, young people, minorities, Indigenous, all these people were the people who were going to be most impacted if we didn't do things, if we didn't actively stop harm. So they were all the communities that I gave most attention to in my work.
That's absolutely brilliant, Julie. Thank you. That is such a wealth of knowledge and background. That is absolutely fabulous. Really, really sets it up nicely. Thank you for that. Should we move on to our second speaker now? We'll have questions at the end, I think, if there's time, discussion. Our second speaker is James. Do you want to take it away, James?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Thank you, Julie. That was a wealth of information shared, and it all resonated with me really deeply in many ways, but that's too much to talk about now. But some of the things I'll be talking about the next 10 minutes will kind of touch on those. Gosh, where do I start really? I suppose I'd like to try and be, because I'm sort of in the middle here, a bit of a bridge between what Julie's spoken about and all her experience and background, and also Nick and JD as well. So from everything European and ideas of citizenship through to biophilic cities and urban, green urban infrastructure and building resilience, really. Just to put things in a bit of context, I'm talking about the ZAD commune in Western France. And although it's a rural example, a rural model of an activist commune, it certainly resonates a lot with the, of course, the urban context. And I suppose if you wanted a very good example of an urban commune, an urban radical commune in a big city, you probably wouldn't go far wrong to look at Christiania in Copenhagen in Denmark. That's a very good example. So you don't want to look at my ugly mug for the next 10 minutes. So I'm going to give you a little photo slideshow of just really images for you to focus on whilst you're hearing what essentially it's a story that I'll be telling about the ZAD, what it is, where it is, why it's so inspiring, and my own kind of personal reflections on visiting the ZAD a couple of years ago. So I hope you find it of interest. So do you need me, Jamie, do you need me to start the slideshow, or are you doing this now? Let me see.
The slideshow is happening.
Oh, it's on now, is it? Okay. All right. Okay. So the ZAD means zone to defend, zone à défendre in French. My French pronunciation is a bit rusty, so forgive me. The ZAD is a utopian experiment of commoning on 4,000 acres of rural land in Western France. And in 2007, at the height of its health, the zone comprised around 250 people living in 60 collectives. In the face of this rapidly unfolding global ecological collapse, La ZAD emerges as a post-capitalist, post-carbon future which is being lived every day for real. It's an ecologically sensitive place, a tapestry of fields, woods and wetlands. The territory was first liberated in 1968 from the French state's plans to build a new airport for the nearby city of Nantes, which already has a perfectly functioning airport anyway. I think people in the city just didn't want the aeroplanes flying over the city centre. So this occupation was achieved, or the occupation was achieved by farmers who were living on the land, who opposed the plans. And in recent years, the zone has been opened up to welcome anyone, particularly activists, citizens from all walks of life, who are willing to stand in solidarity as protectors of this wondrous autonomous territory. The ZAD is socially, culturally, and tactically diverse, which is key to its existence so far. In the new year of 2018, after 50 years of legal battles with the farming landowners and certainly over the past decade, numerous eviction attempts, the French state announced that it had finally abandoned the airport plans for good. But in the wake of this victory, the peoples of the ZAD knew only too well that this was certainly not the end of their struggle. These are people that just wanted to be left alone to live in peace. So the next chapter of their story unfolded with uncompromising brutality. In the spring of 2018, with an army of 2,500 police in armoured vehicles wielding tear gas and stun grenades, the state unleashed an attack on the ZAD people. For example, everybody on the zone was affected, but in particular, I'd give you an example, the anarcho-primitivists who were living peacefully on the eastern side of the zone were entirely wiped out. They all vanished, and the people still living on the ZAD, who are still there, don't know where they went. The fierce siege of evictions lasted 8 days at an obscene daily cost of over 400,000 euros of taxpayers' money. And it was the biggest mobilisation of French police since the riots of May 1968. And to this day, the French state is still intent on trying to evict anyone living at the ZAD without rights or deeds. And yet, these courageous Zadists are still standing defiant. They're incredible people. So I visited the ZAD in the hot, dry summer of 2018. The farmhouse of La Rondière was my home for a week, and it's on the edge of the majestic Forêt de Rohan, the Forest of Rohan, right in the centre of the zone, which is alongside one of the main intersecting roads. La Rondière is home to a collective of activist artists who are friends of mine and farmers, and it houses the beautiful ZAD Welcome Centre and Library. And one of its most striking features is that it has a lighthouse, and I don't know if we've come to the lighthouse pictures yet on the slideshow, but you should see those any moment, as well as the anarchist camembert cat label, which is quite superb. I love that. The lighthouse, a phare in French, is around 20 metres high, and it serves not just as a majestic landmark, but also crucially as a strategic outlook post during police invasions. So in the spring eviction riots, it was extremely useful for the people of ZAD.
Just a couple of minutes, Jamie.
Okay.
James. Sorry,
it has a huge banner of the noble Mexican revolutionary Emiliano Zapata, which hangs proudly above the farmhouse. And that week I ate delicious vegetarian and vegan food, which was prepared and cooked in the farmhouse's rustic communal kitchen. The vegetables were either grown within the organic permaculture gardens on the zone or donated by the local markets. My friend and fellow activist artist JJ was my guide for the week, and he was very generous with his time as we walked for miles across the landscape. However, the zone's so huge, I probably only saw maybe a quarter of its landscape, really. Together, one particular day, we explored the broken remains of many lovingly made homes, and it was that the police crushed with their bulldozing machines during the eviction riots. And I felt like an intruder. It was an uncomfortable experience being a voyeur of all this destruction. In some places, the roads and the tracks were covered in defiant graffiti, slogans against the state's unlawful brutality, spray painted alongside the charred remains of burned out cars that had been abandoned by the roadside, which a few months earlier in the spring of 18 had been flaming blockades to try and keep the police away. Yet I also experienced the hope of new life emerging on the zone whilst I was there. New infrastructure building and the rich fabric of life which unfolded day after day. At the community of the Ambazada, I helped to make a new wooden barn that was to be used subsequently as a meeting house and a banqueting house. And I learned to do cobbing, which, if you're unfamiliar what cobbing is, it's an organic technique of plastering using manure and clay and straw, and it was amazing. And I can actually say that I did my little bit to help build the revolution. It was an amazing experience. Gosh, there's so much to talk about here and tell you about. I've almost finished, really. You'll be glad to know. Just another few more bits and bobs here, just I want to touch on. There are no planning laws on the ZAD. And so this freedom has allowed space for an array of beautiful vernacular buildings of homes, such as the one I helped to build at the Ambazada, to emerge literally from the soil. And these are made predominantly from recycled, reclaimed materials and timber from the forest as well. The ZAD's made up of micro communities that are all scattered across the landscape. And walking from place to place, I encountered various aspects of the activities of daily life, such as the organic bakery, the brewery, the fromagerie, the concert hall, the shoemaker, the medicinal herbs field, and the Pirate Claxton radio bus. And apart from these few pockets of busy activity, the general ambience of the ZAD was actually quite relaxed and sleepy. And it really was a world away from the torrid violence, mud and tear gas that saturated the land and the people during the evictions of spring 2018. There's a global ZAD solidarity movement. It's become more than just a place. It's blossomed into a powerful, artful symbol of hope and resistance in a world that's dominated by capitalist greed and inequality. ZAD resonates with people around the world, and it's a common cause to unite, and it certainly has a very special place in my heart. And as the saying goes, whether that's on banners by word of mouth, or that's spray painted on the side of buildings or on the ground, ZAD Partout, ZAD everywhere. And that's it from me.
Thank you, James. That's really deeply inspiring. Thank you. Terrific stuff. We've got a certain amount of contrast in this session. We're now going to pass over to JD, who's from the Global Network of Biophilic Cities, to talk about how cities around the world are reconsidering their futures. JD. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, everybody. And I apologize for being late. The United States keeps you on your toes because we change our time zone twice a year. It happened this weekend. I should have known that. I thought I was 55 minutes early, and I was so impressed that 103 people were also 55 minutes early, but I was actually 5 minutes late. So I apologize, everybody. But those are two wonderful speakers. I have a presentation as well, Jamie, that I was hoping to show the slides for, if that's okay. Hopefully this works. Is this visible to everybody?
Yeah, it is, JD.
Oh, wonderful. Great. Excellent. So, I will focus today on kind of the emotional connection to nature that is possible in the urban landscape. So the reality is that it's a rapidly urbanizing planet, and we want to create that connection to nature for so many reasons, which I'll talk about in the urban landscape. And to me, there is a magic between that kind of melding of the man-made environment and allowing nature to flourish amongst these locations. And really that's what's at the heart of biophilic cities. So, what are we drawn to? What is this concept of biophilia? What is it that creates this sense of something larger than us, this sense of awe, a better perspective when we are able to be outside in the natural world and breathe in that fresh air, breathe deeper, slow our heart rates. The whole concept is biophilia, popularized by E.O. Wilson, talking about that evolution with nature for the human species. And when we have that connection with nature as part of our daily lives, we feel that mental stimulation, that benefit, that sense of peace. I love this image of Patrick Blanc's Green Wall, one of the many in Paris, and just you can really see the sense on her face of just the absorption and the calm and peace that comes with these pieces in the urban landscape. There is a science behind it. There is obviously this emotional connection that sometimes is hard to put into words, but a lot of people are studying these ideas. One of the very interesting ones, and I think relevant to the discussion of art, is from this professor out of the University of Oregon in the United States, looking into the fractal patterns of nature and how these repeating patterns speak to our minds in terms of the organizations and bring a sense of peace to our brains that helps us to relax, and that we are drawn to those images and that repeating pattern in nature, which is also emblematic of art as we know it. He has a very interesting study of Jackson Pollock paintings that have the same natural fractal pattern. And really, he was able to authenticate a Jackson Pollock painting based on the same fractal pattern that you would see occurring in the natural landscape. Of course, birdsong creates a visceral response for us. It helps us relax. So the opportunity to include birdsong both, in the form of music in our lives in the interior of our homes versus outside and experiencing that has so many positive health benefits for us. The studies are tremendous, and this is just within the last decade or so. There's studies to demonstrate that all of these things happen when we have interactions with nature in the urban landscape. So many positive benefits. And it certainly means even more to us in this present day when we are confined to our homes, when we are disconnected with the larger society, friends and family. This need to escape and be part of the larger world has put tremendous demand on the natural spaces in cities, and certainly demonstrates the need for us to plan going forward to create that access to nature at many different scales so that we all have that ability in our cities. Singapore, which is part of this network, I would also mention that Birmingham is as well as Vitoria-Gasteiz in Barcelona. Many of the presenters over the course of the 2 days experience these cities as well. Singapore has begun, its progress as that garden city model, that model of the city that has nature at many points and opportunities in terms of parks and green spaces, to being a city in a garden. So that the city is one aspect of this much larger natural world, and is actually transitioned now to a city in nature. So part of its experience during the COVID pandemic has been it's not able to care for some of the cultivated spaces in the city that it had previously, but it's experiencing the benefits of letting wildness take over, and the benefits and the attachment and the connection to nature that you receive when you allow that to start to flourish in the urban landscape. So at Biophilic Cities, we talk about the progression from the room in the interior of buildings all the way to the region in every space in between. These are the cities that participate in the network. We have many partner organizations working in many other cities across the globe, all sharing ideas and trying to move these ideas forward in terms of implementation on the ground. I won't dig too deep into what Biophilic Cities does in this brief presentation, but please visit our website to learn more about the policies and programs that we're putting in place. But for me, biophilic art fits into this ecological wonder piece of the map of why cities participate in this Biophilic Cities network. We produce films that try to capture some of these stories. We also produce a journal that's very visual, that attempts to put the images and the stories together. Biophilic design has been associated with the design of buildings and interiors, and Stephen Keller is such a pioneer in that area and brought so much to this conversation. There's far too much on this slide to see, and it's far too tiny. But what I'm conveying with this slide is, this is Stephen Keller's patterns and ideas. It's not just the physical manifestation of trees and plants and green that we see in cities, but it's also the representation of nature in the art and in the built environment. Whether that looks like a butterfly in the form of this beautifully designed cancer center, whether it's the vertical forest that we all know from Bosco Verticali in Milan, and this new development in Toronto. It's this project in Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States, that is a retrofit of a building for the headquarters for the Interface Carpet Company that seeks to have no more impact than the Piedmont forest that existed on that land previous to the city being developed. And to celebrate that, they have wrapped the building in an image of the Piedmont forest that brings this dappled light into the interior of the buildings, and such as a beautiful representation of this effort to make our buildings more than they are right now. In Vitoria-Gasteiz, it's combining the green walls with art installations to create a magic in the urban landscape. I love this example from Perth, Australia. This is what existed previously, a typical fountain that you would see in the urban landscape, to this, which is an urban wetland that is also a performing art space and also creates the opportunity for children to use those stepping stones and see this living ecosystem in the heart of the city. So it combines so many of the things that we aspire to in this design of biophilic cities. To me, one of the highest and best results we can achieve with these projects is to bring nature to those communities that have inadequate access to nature in the urban environment. And this is a wonderful project in Washington, D.C. called the 11th Street Bridge Project that is combining, literally bridging two different parts of the socioeconomic elements of that city with this project, and has been underway for 5 years. And really the first 5 years have been spent developing an equity toolkit to ensure that when this project is finished and completed, it doesn't have the unintended consequence of displacing the communities that it was intended to bring nature to in the urban landscape. And a big piece of that is capturing the culture and the stories of the communities that live there. And so creating this performance space and incorporating art and history into the design of this green project, I think has just tremendous value. In Portland, Oregon, which experiences rain 11 months of the year. Sorry, that's an exaggeration. Portland could be angry with me for that. 9 months of the year, I think, is probably more accurate. It's very lovely in the summer in terms of sunshine. But they have rain, and they have incorporated into the built environment in terms of art installations and really capturing some of the beauty of how water moves through the urban environment. That's telling that story. In Toronto, it's telling the story of the rivers that we have placed under the urban landscape that have been lost, that run beneath our feet and we might not know are there. It's bringing those to life through the spoken word. It's designing buildings that undulate like the waves of water, this Aqua Tower in Chicago. And of course, it's the art itself. It's the murals and the paintings and the representations of art in the environment of the urban landscape. This is in Fremantle, Australia. These are Wellington, New Zealand, Phoenix, Arizona, Portland, Oregon. So little pieces of that urban environment, again, like Stephen Kellert's biophilic design, are emulating and bringing that sense of nature. One last example to share with you all is Habitecture. This, to me, just illustrates the potential perfectly by creating habitat for the species that you find in urban landscapes, like bats and birds and other species, in these beautiful art installations that can be included in the built structures for the urban landscape. So, facilitating the growth of biodiversity and creating that habitat and doing it in such a beautiful and artistic way, to me, is magic. One last thing to mention is, Jamie and I have talked about the opportunity to create a virtual gallery on the Biophilics website that, displays the art of, many artists working in cities around the world that are combining nature and art in biophilic ways, and creating the opportunity to have that gallery attached to, other displays of your work and information about your work, to kind of have this kind of growing community that's creating this emotional connection to biophilic cities through art. So if that's something that you are interested in participating in, please contact Jamie or myself, and we would love to have you be included. So thank you all.
Well, thank you, JD. That, again, was just totally inspiring. It's just great to see so much activity around the world and so many inspirational ideas. It's really comforting, really. It always is, to connect with that network. I'm just going to close with a little case study example, which is Birmingham in the UK. It may surprise you to know that we're the only UK's biophilic city currently. We were one of the founder members of the international movement back in 2013-14. And one of the things that was criticized at the time was that we didn't have an implementation mechanism, or we didn't have a budget. Everyone said, oh, this is wow that we're joining the Biophilic Cities Network, but where's your money going to come from? Assuming that it was something additional rather than it being something that's part of the lifeblood of the city. And actually it needs to be built into our thinking and our response to place, not something that's layered on top. So I've just got some slides to show as to what we're trying to do in Birmingham to centralize those notions and get away from the idea that the environment is outside of decision making or is away from people's lives. So there's a lovely quote from the Cuban anthropologist and social scientist who says that Alberto Villoldo, who says that most people follow maps and a few people make them. And I think all the presentations and everything you've seen today is an example of just that, that actually if you wait or you're looking for a pre-formed map as to how to get to the future, it basically doesn't exist. And that's each of ours responsibility to actually create that map and create a way forward that reaches us to somewhere different from where we are at the moment. There's such a comfort factor in us accepting business as usual, because for us, we're really doing okay. Whereas for all the other people in lots of different sections of society in the UK, but also elsewhere in the world, they're not doing okay. And the whole of nature is far from doing okay, as we know. We've never been in such a situation as this, with species loss and habitat destruction around the world. And of course, that's one of the key factors that's driving climate change, has been for 200 years. And really, it's the fact that we have established city living that is the root cause of both of those phenomena, really. If you think about climate change and you think about ecological emergency, and you even think about COVID-19, the current pandemic, there is a connection between each of those three things. And it's actually our relationship with nature and the natural environment. Those zoonotic diseases that have leaped across species, which COVID-19 is, and the shock to us is the fact that they are contagious diseases. So they're communicable diseases. And for us in the West, we haven't had that for 100 years probably. And interestingly, the root of parks in the world came from the UK. And in 1848, we had a Public Health Act in the UK. That's the one, Jamie. Thank you. That was basically to try and restore the health condition of people and their livelihoods and also their productivity. Public parks were created as a health instrument. And so if we move on to the program we're called is Naturally Birmingham. It's funded by the Lottery and National Trust and part sponsored by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. And so it's a response to a government parliamentary inquiry in 2016-17 that looked at the state of parks in the nation, and in fact they're in serious decline. So we've got to find a way in which we can reconnect people and reconnect cities with the governance of the natural environment. So next slide, please, Jamie. And this is this connection between those three global agendas, which for me, the center of that circle is our relationship with nature. Next slide, please. So if the center of that circle is the relationship with nature, then when we thought this would be a really interesting experiment in Birmingham. That you're not meant to be able to read the text on those just now, but that circular diagram represents the whole of the council plan and its strategic objectives in terms of what the city wants to achieve across those four broad headings to improve the lives of the people in the city. And for each of those headings, we have shown how connecting with nature and the natural environment actually creates long-term benefit for each and every one of those actions, simply because nature is the key resource we have that's supporting life and creating all health and wealth. So next slide, please. This is a graph that has come from a government report, and actually was this graph that generated the government response to create a 25-year environment plan. Because what it shows on the left is a declining red line, the loss of species and habitat in the UK, and the vertical left axis is about 1970, down to the central one at 2015, the time of publication. And basically the trajectory for our own UK habitats and species is continuing decline. Now, the reason for that are many, but the most significant reason is the fact that effectively what it's telling us is we have taken nature for granted, and we have made the assumption that a linear economy can continuously take from nature and nature will always recover. And the dotted red line to the right of the center shows that the trajectory is continuous decline, where it gets to the point where nature can't recover, or effectively you run out of nature. So that has a huge impact on our lives and our livelihoods and everything that we're dependent on. So what's needed right at this crux junction right now, where the little circle is a complete transformational rethink of our governance arrangements, our economies, social policies or environment policies or economic policies, in order to jump onto the green dotted line, which rises up to the right, which is about how do you restore that nature And it isn't about directing money to the Wildlife Trust to plant more trees. It's about an holistic change in the way in which we all value nature and all systems value nature. And so those shaded green sections are about growing capacity for everybody to redirect their efforts into this new path where nature becomes the central core of the issue in relation to our health or well-being, our economy, our prosperity. And it's not something that should be the responsibility of the environmental bodies. It's about a holistic collective effort. And it has to increase in a stepped way every 5 years and bring about that ratchet principle that's built into the Paris Climate Accord. It's the same approach that's needed for addressing climate change. For all these things is an incremental step change is what we need. Final slide, Jamie, is so we have created a new governance model for the city of Birmingham, keeping those objectives, keeping those outcomes that the city has set itself, but balancing them against how does nature play a part in that? What is the center? What is the connection between nature and those outcomes? And how can it become everybody's business? And what's emerged is the fact that we need these supporting frameworks, one around environmental justice, which has very much come out of the conversation so far. That needs to be underpinned by a sustainable finance framework, because you have to value things differently, calculate them differently, and pay and fund for them differently. You then are in a position where you can literally achieve a healthy city because of the fact that you've set up a different paradigm. And at that point, you can engage much more actively with your citizenship because you've created a responsive model that's actually built on their needs and aspirations and futures and brings them into the picture rather than it being us and them. So it's a complete governance change, and that we are implementing or trying to implement right at this minute in Birmingham, where we think it will then answer that question of what is the mechanism to create and generate a biophilic city. And you can see those green zones are moving out in timescales so that actually it would increase its capacity over a 25-year time frame. So that's our model that I wanted to share with you, and that's our response to the Biophilic City Challenge for Birmingham. So I think these have been a very interesting collection of talks and interrelated comments, and we throw the floor open, as it were, to any questions that any of the viewers have got or any comments that anyone wants to make about those. Are there any? There might be some comments in the chat. James, would you like to just introduce yourself? Because I think that was something we missed.
Yes.
We skipped over in the.
It was.
Sorry,
that was very clumsy of me. Just very briefly. Hello. In retrospect, I'm James Brady. I'm a Merseyside-based artist, activist, and curator, and all kind of cultural things. I do all sorts of things. I'm also a publisher, and my main interests are focused on ecological thinking and ecological action in order to create resilience in this era, which is the sixth extinction. And I could say other things, but I won't. That's who I am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So how does culture, there's a question here in the chat, how does culture fit into those 4 pillars? Health, well-being, children, jobs and skills, and housing. And that's really answered by this whole point of integration, that actually all aspects of life can, should, must connect through a cultural thread. It's not something that should be separately identified or separately operated. And in fact, we all learn through myth, through storytelling, through narratives, through experience. And that's the key to these things, is that we need to move to an integrated model where we're thinking holistically in those ways rather than partitioning things off and handling them in separate ways. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Nick. If we're trying to think more ecologically, then culture runs through all of this. And some people, it isn't tidy. A lot of people can't cope with the idea of complexity, but everything is a mesh, an entanglement, and we need to embrace that. It's not easy, and yeah, culture is through all this as well as everything else, and everything meets everything. It's all about the relationships of relationships.
And there were some wonderful examples in JD's work that were shown there in terms of the biophilic cities around the world that just achieves that. Julie, do you want to say something more about the Bauhaus New Deal in the last few minutes? Oh, you're on mute, Julie. No, you're still on mute. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Yeah? Okay, sorry, I didn't even know I'd done that. Right, first of all, I'd just like to add to the previous comments about culture and where it fits in, because of course it does run through everything. At a policy level, one of the legacies that I left as part of my work as an MEP was to change STEM to STEAM. Yeah. So, everybody, all the policymakers talk about science, technology, engineering and maths. It's always a much higher priority than arts in all the funding kind of hierarchies that we've got. And I challenged that throughout the whole of my time as an MEP. At every opportunity, I would talk about STEAM and I would explain it. So the A stands for arts, and I would demonstrate, it's an artificial border between science and arts, because all scientists and innovators and inventors have to be creative in order to come up with completely new imaginative ideas and solutions. And artists are working in science all the time. So musicians and dancers are counting and working with space, for example. Visual artists are working often with chemistry and physics. And it's a completely artificial division between these worlds. So at least across the EU now, STEAM is in the ascendancy rather than STEM. We need to, and I was so proud of that, because it talks about STEAM in the new agenda for culture, which was adopted by the Commission. Regarding the Bauhaus programme, it's just that the Green New Deal overall is the Commission's big new programme for the next semester, and the EU works on 7-year financial frameworks. It's quite the financial frameworks are in a different kind of cycle from the parliamentary cycles. So the idea is that a new set of MEPs can't suddenly turn over something and end something that was already put in place by quite a robust process. So the Green New Deal has to be relevant to every area of European policy, and there are different policy directorates. And so the Culture and Education Directorate had to think about how were they going to work with the Green New Deal? What are they going to do in relation to that? So the Bauhaus project, it's a very, very new initiative. To be honest, I don't know very much about it. I'm not, I was the vice chair of the European Parliament until January the 31st. Sorry, the vice chair of the Committee of Culture in the European Parliament until January 31st, but I'm not now. So, but I'm still trying to keep tabs on what's happening, because we, well, first of all, I hope that we rejoin at some point, and that the young people whose futures have been robbed will be able to rightfully participate at a really core level with their peers across Europe, but also because we cannot solve this climate crisis by ourselves. Air pollution doesn't stop at borders. Fish have no idea where the border is in the sea. So, we have to be working together. So what I've picked up so far is that the Bauhaus project is the Directorate for Culture and Education. It's their response to the commissioner, to the president of the commission, saying each of the directorates has to have a project that fulfills the ambition of the Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal is about zero carbon. That it's a pathway to zero carbon, and it encompasses a lot of initiatives that have already been happening. So, for example, the circular economy, renewable energy, and it's really good to see that the arts has got a role to play in that. I'll try and find the link and I'll put it up in the chat for you so that you can see more about it. And I, from my memory of what I read, it does build on this idea of STEAM, not STEM. So I suppose in that sense, I am partly to thank for what we've ended up with at European level, which is a project that recognises the synergies between art and science and the way that people, artists and scientists and people of different disciplines have to collaborate. One of the things that it will do is it will make it easier for artists and people working in social sciences to get research money from the Horizon programme, because that was always quite difficult. The Horizon programme is the big research and development programme that lots of universities put in their research projects into. And actually, here in the UK, we had a huge, we were very, very successful in the Horizon programme. We were key partners of many, many Horizon funded projects. So I hope that can continue. And can I just say, it's so good to see that this project is an international project. It's, the reach, the work with the university community in Barcelona and other places around the world is just demonstrates, regardless of what politicians do, innovators and people with imagination will still come together to do the right thing and work across borders and, and not be so covetous of their ideas for themselves and their own aggrandisement, but understand that what we all have to do is work together for the good of humanity. Maybe just one more thing about the Bauhaus project. So I think the way that it's going to work is going to start very kind of just within the EU member states, so within the 27 EU member states. It will also start working with the new member states that want to accede to the EU, so the Balkan countries like Serbia, Montenegro, Albania, Kosovo, Bosnia and Herzegovina. They will all be included in the programme. But the EU has an external action service, which is how it works with third countries. We've become a third country effectively. And it's very clear in the guidelines already for the Bauhaus project that the EU sees that it will be working beyond its immediate borders and the borders of its enlarged bloc. And I think it would just be so fantastic for us to be ready at that point, so maybe we should be thinking already over here, what would we want to do for our Bauhaus project? So at the point where we're able to officially work with EU partners, we're ready to go. That would be good. I'll look for the link and post it in the chat now.
Great, thanks, Judy. Right, well, I think that brings us to a close.
Nick, can I just say,
it'd be nice to hear from JD. Yeah, JD, do you want to go ahead? Yeah.
So I just want to say there's a really interesting conversation going on, about kind of the differences between, some of the city policy kind of efforts and, much more, kind of transcendental, projects. And I think that's part of the inherent challenge of some of these challenges that we're facing. how much can we work with the existing system to reach
Yeah.
that critical mass of change that we need. But then at what point do we recognize that the existing system doesn't work and it's not going to address our problems? So is just a conversation that is so important. And I'd love to talk about it more, James. And it's really, to me, so central to this work. So
it is. Yeah, both agendas equally valid and both needed. Yeah, absolutely. Great. That's a great place to finish. So thanks everybody for tuning in. And there's another session to follow. And Julie's posted the connection to the Green New Deal there, the European version, in the chat. So
thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for tuning in. And
take care.
If you want to follow anything up, then get in touch with us after this. Yeah, thank you. Goodbye.